Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome in this book launch, this session of the APF, Redefining the Agenda for Social Justice. I am Koen de Tavernier. I work for WSM, which is a Belgian solidarity organization. We mainly focus on labor rights and social protection. And to give you the link with Asia-Europe People's Forum, in Asia, we try to connect the INSPIRE network, the International Network for Social Protection Rights. And Mina and Francine have asked me to facilitate or to guide you all through the book they have written with the title Redefining the Agenda for Social Justice. Maybe some practical information first. If you have any questions, and we planned actually the session in two sections, half of the time, roughly 45 minutes, we would have the dialogue and the exchange with the two authors of the book. And then the second half, we will do Q&A with all of you who can ask your questions. But please send your questions in the Q&A, because if you send them in the chat, they might go lost. One information also practically, there is translation in Khmer. For the people who need translation, you can click the little globe at the bottom of your screen and then click the translation into Khmer. So allow me to first introduce the authors, because when you draft a book, you write a book, this merits a little bit of an introduction, a little bit maybe more elaborate introduction than any ordinary panel. Let me start with Francine Mestre. Francine has a PhD in social sciences, and she worked at the European institutions and for several Belgian universities. Her research concerns the social dimension of globalization, poverty, inequality, social protection, public services, and gender. She is an active member of the International Council of the World Social Forum and co-coordinating the social justice cluster in the Asia-Europe People's Forum. So in our very AEPF, Francine is co-convening actually together with Mina, the social justice cluster. She is the author of several books in Dutch, French, and English on development, on poverty, on inequality, and on social commons. She is also the founder of the Global Network of Global Social Justice and currently works on a project for social commons. Social commons, a concept of which we will, I think, hear a little bit more during our discussions. Mina Menon is an activist from India. She's a researcher and a writer. Mina worked as a full-time organizer with the Left Party for 20 years, which makes me wonder which Left Party was that. She was also the vice president at the GKSS Union, which is the Mill Workers Action Committee. And after that, she was the India country coordinator with focus on the Global South, an Asian policy think tank and advocacy group. She also did a brief stint as a consultation with the UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, and she was part of the core organizing team of the World Social Forum process in India. Until recently, she worked as a senior consultant with ActionAid in India, and now she's an independent consultant working on issues of labor, urbanization, housing, and new politics. And she is the co-author of the book 100 Years, 100 Voices. Okay, this being said, welcome everybody again. Maybe a question for Francine and Mina both, but I suggest to not confuse the audience. Maybe Francine can start first. A book. We are in a People's Forum. Usually we debate campaigns. We have sometimes ideological discussions. It's about networking, getting to know each other. But why a book in a People's Forum? Can you explain a bit more of that? Because a book takes a long time to read, and it's not a manifesto, it's not a brief leaflet which you use to sensitize the broader population. So it's quite a lot of work. So why did you come up with the idea to write a book in the framework of the Asia-Europe People's Forum? Francine, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Koen. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, the point is that it took indeed a very long time, and the longest time was needed for the publisher. We had to wait almost a year for having it ready. It is now ready and available in hardcover and in ebook. Well, in fact, this book is if I say nothing new, it sounds very negative, and it should not be very negative. But this book is the result of the work we have been doing in the different forums, in the different AAPFs. We have been working for 4 years, I think, on different aspects that now are um, considered in the book. Because I think it is 4 years ago in the AEPF forum in Mongolia that it was decided to make a charter, and it was decided to have several conferences. And so we started organizing these conferences. We started organizing, writing the Global Charter for Social Protection Rights. And it is at the end of that process that we thought, well, in fact, we have a lot of new material, a lot of material that deserves to be known. Because, of course, a lot is being said and is being written today on social protection. We think, we claim that we have a new perspective, precisely with this concept that you mentioned, Koen, of the social commons. And also because, of course, we do support the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. We do support the social protection clause of the ILO, of course, because these are very important. But we also want to go beyond. We want to go beyond because, you know, SDGs, social protection flaws, they have been given. And all social movements are invited to fight for the things that have been given. And we think we should fight for things that have not been given yet. We shouldn't fight for the things that organizations already decided they want to give it to us, if we fight for it. We want to fight for the new things. We want to go beyond it. And we want a universal, a very broad social protection with social assistance, social assurances, labor law, and public services. So that is the objective of the book.
Okay. Mina, is there anything you would like to add on the why, and how of the book?
Unmute, please.
Yes. So, no, I think Francine has pretty much talked about why, and a little bit about how, as she said, this really is a culmination of many people's work. It's not even just the two of us, or it's a collective voice of all the people who have put in their thoughts into this. And it's also something that we believe will inform the work that people do. Because a lot of us, what we do is actually part of demanding some part or other of social protection, and which actually adds up to a comprehensive approach. So actually putting it together and making it contextual, I mean, talking to people about broadening the parameters of the demands we make, broadening the aspirations that we are addressing. Because very often what happens, and especially in the NGO sector, is that people are looking at some small issue or other and often forgetting that this has to be part of a general concept, one. And two, there also has to be a framework on how to get there. So we believe that this perspective actually helps that. It makes this possible. Like, if I can just say a little bit about, some of the underpinnings of the book in terms of thinking. Like, we are saying that social protection must be universal and comprehensive. It's non-negotiable. It's non-negotiable. Second is that the welfare of people has to be a priority in policy and in planning, right? And the third is the state has to be the primary agency to make sure that this happens. And this is another thing, a very simple concept it seems to be, but it's often being forgotten. And there is a tendency to think that, okay, if the government doesn't do it, maybe we can do it ourselves, and then look at insurance possibilities and so on and so forth for its health. We know that in crisis this happens, and especially in poorer countries where there is a general misconception that is not possible. So actually the fourth thing is it is possible. And to look at possibilities, how this can happen. And I think that's where the book comes in. I think it's very, very important to say it can be done. The welfare state is not dead. I mean, the concept of the welfare state. Of course, it may be different. It may be in a different form, but it's not something that's over. We actually have no alternative. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
So the book is about hope, and is about a long-term vision, a long-term idea. We often also, even in the APF, we have discussed like urgencies and crises popping up. Unfortunately, of course, the same the bigger crisis going on right now, the COVID pandemic, is absorbing and is demanding a lot of energy, a lot of manpower, a lot of capacity to cope, even. So maybe Francine, on this long-term perspective, and Mina already touched a few elements. I also noticed while reading the book that the Global Charter for Social Protection Rights is like the guiding line throughout the book. Maybe you could explain a little bit more about that. You have to unmute, I think.
Sorry. Yeah, you mean on the long term. Look, obviously, social protection cannot be achieved in 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. It is a long-term project per definition, because the objective is to have welfare and well-being for all. And that cannot be achieved in 1 year. And as it has been said already yesterday in the plenary meeting, what it is about is to have people being able to live free from want and free from fear. And that means that you have to look very, very broadly. And what we have been working on also, and what makes our project different from other projects for social protection, is that we focus on the interlinkages with other sectors. Because what COVID has made so very clear now is that it is not enough to have healthcare, to have doctors and hospitals. You also need water, you need housing. So these points have to be taken in, and this is what we are still working on. This project is not finished. This is an ongoing process. And in the end, what it is about, and what COVID also shows, it is about social transformation, economic transformation, political transformation. If you want to have this good health, and we now see it with COVID, you have to tackle the corporations of big pharma so that you can have vaccines. And the same with agriculture. If you want welfare and well-being for farmers, you will have to tackle the Monsantos. So it is in the end a project for social, economic, and political transformation. And it is, saying this, it is a project for sustainability. Sustainability for people, sustainability for societies collectively, and sustainability for nature. And in that way, it is per definition a long-term, and I would say an ongoing process.
And maybe, because I don't know everybody who's in the audience, maybe you should indeed briefly explain the very concept of the core of the social protection, how as it is being described in the book, Francine.
Well, as I said, it is not just social security. It is much more than that. It is not only healthcare. It is not only childcare. It is not only helping people when they are disemplloyed. It goes way beyond that. It is also helping poor people, obviously. I mean, beyond the labor market. And it is also public services. And it is also labor law, as I said. So it is these core elements of social protection, plus everything that is directly needed. Yesterday we had a wonderful roundtable on housing. Housing is usually not considered a point for social protection, yet it is. And again, COVID confirmed that it is. If you order a lockdown and people have no home, there is a problem. So what this COVID crisis has shown, in fact, it has confirmed everything that we have been saying in the past years. And in that way, it makes me in the first place particularly unhappy that these things happen, but it makes me happy that it is confirmed that our vision is, I think, very correct and very, very much needed.
Okay, so indeed, if there would be any little silver lining in this devastating crisis, it's probably also indeed that. Maybe for Mina, could you explain a bit more? So Francine briefly touched it already. There is a chapter on public services. There is a chapter on employment, unemployment, and precarious work. There's also a chapter on housing. This is indeed way beyond, like say, the classic definitions or the classic concepts of social security, social protection. But maybe let's take them one by one. Could you briefly explain why and how precisely these links and the importance of, let's start with public services, are so important to establish this transformation Francine is talking about?
Well, Kun, I want to actually this is linked up as well, all the things that you talked about, and that's what the book says, right? See, in the recent COVID crisis, we saw, in India, I'll take the example of India, where migrants in India had to walk long distances to go back home where they come from because they were deprived of an income. But they were not just deprived of an income, but because they were deprived of an income, they were deprived of, they were not unable to pay rent, and they were deprived of a home. They didn't have food through the distribution channels that normally food would be provided to workers. They didn't have access to it because they didn't have cards, because you need cards to be able to access that. And because these cards were not made available to people like them with no papers, so you see how it all links up. Like there's one human being or a family, a whole community, and so many things happen when income breaks down. So what we're really saying is that the basic conditions of life must be provided, and we are just calling that social protection. You can call it by any other name, but that's what we are calling social protection, that the basic conditions of life must be met. It must not depend on one thing, like a salary, like a job, like a house. It cannot be, because you need all these things to survive. So these are not luxuries. These are, all we are saying is one basic need being fulfilled is not enough. All basic needs to be fulfilled. And if you look at life today, urban life particularly, all these things have to be provided. Otherwise, you can't go to the nearest well, draw water if you are in a city, right? So urban life has in fact made this even more critical. You can't go to your backyard and grow food, and you don't have space to grow your own food. So I would say that urbanization, the globalization, because of precarity of work, because there's no savings, because if you had some savings, maybe you could have used that to pay your rent. So all these things came together in COVID in this way. So precarity, what you're talking about in terms of the fact that you don't have a secure employment, which is a big reward from neoliberal economic policies. This is a big fallout. And public services, where is the question of public services if you don't even have a home and you don't have an income? So you have to have all these things. Okay, now going to the second thing, that's what came out of the housing conference and the work that we are doing on housing, to tell you how the interconnections work. When we are talking about housing, there are many, many places in India, for instance. I'm talking about India because that's my main experience. There are many places in which government has built homes for people, and people aren't going to live there. Why? Because it doesn't have proper water facilities, it doesn't have a road, it doesn't have any bus by which can take them to the place where they work. So what does housing mean if you don't have all these things? So public services, civic services, all come into even one basic need called housing, because without that, housing doesn't make any sense. So the interconnectedness is not a philosophical concept. It's actually a very practical concept.
And if you talk, maybe just to be more specific, unemployment, of course, you explained people losing their job, losing their income, precarity of work. Um, do you consider some specific elements or specific measures needed there to include or to cover people in the informal economy with this broad social protection concept?
Well, let's see, social protection, as I said, we are delinking it from the kind of employment that you may be in, right? Whether you are a migrant worker or whether you are a formal employee, this should be made available. However, wherever precarity has been, like in India, as you know, 450 million people, there is no real counting, but we generally people say 450 million because that's what we gather from census and other records of the government are in the informal sector. Okay. Formalizing that starts with registering them, making sure that they have a paper saying that they are workers. It means that you have to have insurance and all these other, you have to have health cover and other things that allow you to live, you and your family to live. That has to come even before the demand for formalization of their labor. This is irrespective of whether you become a formal worker. But yes, workers in India did have that cover. They did have the protection of medical coverage. There were many benefits that they had as part of the formal sector because of a 100-year-old trade union struggle, right? Now we are starting again from scratch. We are lost practically everything that we fought for before. I mean, I worked with textile mill workers who are actually part of the formal sector of employment in India. All the things that they fought for, including the neutralization of prices. You know, if prices rise, you got a DNS allowance in order to neutralize the rise in prices. This was added to the wages periodically to make sure that the prices, the increase in prices did not affect their income. There was insurance that is contributory with government and the worker paying. Those things existed. Some basic elements, I'm not saying the things were perfect, but some basic elements were there, and they had the right to organize and fight. Today, I think trade union, the right to organize should be part of social protection, because that's becoming part of a community is very much part of protecting yourself. So you understand, this is how we are perceiving this. The very basic fact of being able to struggle is part of the conditions of life, because you're so down there. You're on the bottom rung of the ladder, and if anything, below that even. So I don't think the issue is about formality and informality alone when we are talking about social protection. But yes, that is a battle that, when you introduced me, that kind of got left out. But that I'm also working president of a network called the Working People's Charter Network, which is a network of organizations working with informal sector workers, including migrants. So this is something we fight all the time. But social protection becomes something that's more immediate even than formal, because it takes a whole system to change for 450 million workers to become formal, but that's a fight that's ongoing. Okay. But in the meantime, even the government agrees that we do need to talk about housing, decent housing. We need to talk about rental housing for workers to live in. And these are debates that we are carrying on. We are not waiting for workers to become formal before demanding those. Okay. I don't know if I've answered your question, but
yeah, plentiful answer of my question. We also have Rene of Rene with us from the Philippines, who also prepared some questions for Francine and Mina, mainly related, I think, to the current situation in Asia. So Rene, could you please briefly introduce yourself and go ahead, ask your questions, and continue the dialogue.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe it's morning in Europe, but may I remind all of you that this is a book launching And as such, we would like to congratulate the two authors of this very fine book, Francine and Mina. I am a uh, retired professor, well, a professor emeritus from the University of the Philippines. But the reality is, I have been a student of these two authors, and I tried to reread the book this afternoon, and I realized the the depth of the thinking that went into the writing of the book, especially well distilling the ideas coming not only from written literature but from the results of different global conferences in Asia, Europe, and other places, starting in I think so many years ago. And I must say the book will serve as a good guide for organizers of the marginalized, the vulnerables, the workers, formal, informal, precarious, and non-standard employees, rural labor poor, rural poor, the coastal poor, the upland poor, and so on, that Mina was discussing or was mentioning earlier. It's also a good guide for those who want to engage government and policymakers in policy dialogue, engagement, and we need a lot of them. And so this book comes in very, very handy. When, before I ask my question, let me say in relation to the discussion earlier by Francine and Mina, some major learnings I got from the book, and also from listening to them through the years. Number one, you see, social protection is a very positive term for many people, and you cannot find any one opposing you. Even the neoliberal conservative, they will not go against any proposal for social protection if stated in a non-qualitative terms. But the first learning I learned is that social protection is not a question of merely poverty alleviation, because it is deeper than that. And in fact, it even goes beyond what the UN's Social Development Goals were saying, that no one shall be left behind. Because what they are saying, and this is a major, major learning for me, it is part of the social commons. And the social commons include, uh, the rights that everybody should enjoy, and the needs that the members of the community should should be met in order to live and survive, and of course keep the race going. Now, the question is, how come there's always deficit in social protection in many countries, despite so many attestation by governments? They're doing their best to meet the social protection requirements of their population, especially in these COVID times. And so uh, what we have here, and this is where the book can be very useful, is that there is really in the world today a class of development frameworks. Class. You see, you have on one hand, well, what we have, for lack of a better term, we call it the neoliberal framework, that everything depends on the market, and the government will only give you a little allowance for education, for health, and other needs, so long as there is a budget for that. And the budget will depend on the results of the market. And the market will depend on how competitive a country is, and the country can be competitive in terms of going global, in terms of liberalization, the regulation, privatization. It's a different framework. But on the other hand, you have this people-centered development framework. And last night, I listened to this wonderful webinar on housing, and things became very clear to me that you see the neoliberal framework versus a people-centered development framework where the people are not only objects of some kind of budget assistance and amelioration, but people are active agents through their communities, to their organized community, in building a better future. And this is, I think, the main message of the book. And in COVID time, this is very important because you see a number of governments, but let me say, the Philippines is one of them. Our government loves to say, we need a whole of government approach. That sounds nice, but if you examine the approach to the COVID pandemic, it is top-down, it is militaristic, and what's happened, the outcome is terrible. To a certain extent, I see that in our some neighboring countries. I don't have to mention them, but this top-down militaristic approach has created more problems. And one outcome is deepening of inequality and uncertainty. And because the economic approach is neoliberal, it is a trickle-down economics, waiting for some stimulus to rev up the economy, and whatever gains from the economic growth will hopefully, from the neoliberal thinking, things will sit down to the masses and they will be better. And that's the neoliberal approach. So my question is, given this situation and given the position of those pushing for a people-centered social protection program, how do we challenge this? Well, of course, neoliberal. Nobody these days want to be called neoliberal. They stop using the term neoliberal because they're a little shy, ashamed about the outcomes. But the default is always the default policy is always neoliberal. Now, my question is, Francine mentioned transformation is the key to all of this, to make this people-centered social protection part of the social commons be the main thing. So how do we push for this transformation program to happen and to make a real social protection happen, country by country, in the north as well as in the south? Thank you. This is one big question. I'm sorry. Hello.
Yes, go ahead. So yeah, so what
Yeah,
would be?
that's my question. How do we, how shall we push this, launch this transformation program? You see, in the ILO, they also love certain terms like just transition, and then of course the labor movement, they have this just transformation. But we know this is a general call, but immediately, what critical adjustment measures should be undertaken by government, but at the level of the civil society or the organized mass movement, what can they do? Yesterday, there's a number of very good initiatives on housing, but I'm wondering, can we make it nationwide? And then this type of community managed housing, and then can this model be ASEAN-wide or Asia-wide? So how do we make this a part of this global movement building? Thank you.
Okay, Francine and Mina, go ahead. How?
Well, I will try. I will try to answer without going on till tomorrow. Let me say this in two elements of in the answer. The first is, obviously you go step by step. And I once called this coherent obstinacy. You need to have your long-term aim, your objective, and you need to be aware that you cannot achieve it in one step, in 2 steps. It is a long-term project. So you need to accept that you need patience, but you need to go on. You cannot stop halfway. And you need to work in different sectors. It's not only fighting for, let's say, childcare. It's not only working for vaccines or for better healthcare. It is also working at the economic level, at the political level for democracy. So that is one element of the question. The awareness that you need patience, you need an articulated fight in different sectors, and also at different levels, at the local level, at the national level, at the global level. So this is not easy. This is absolutely not easy, but I think it is fundamental to understand it and accept it. And that is why comes in the second element, which I think in these times of neoliberalism is extremely important. You need organizing. Not just small, well, yes, you need small social movements at the local level, but these social movements have to organize in something national, in something international. You need to articulate the different fights. And I think the best example we have of a social fight in the past century or more is the fight of the trade unions. They are the ones who have achieved something. And I think we will all be ready to criticize trade unions for the way they are sometimes working. And we will all have our criticism on some ways of fighting and of compromising. But they are the only, till now, the only social movement that have really achieved something. And I think we have to take that example. You now have the women's movement. You now have the anti-racist movement. They are slowly also understanding that they have to organize. Because what we have seen and what we continue to see more and more in many countries is that there is a social protest. There is a huge repression. And we know who is strongest because they have the instruments. Governments have the military. I mean, it is easy to suppress and to repress a social protest. And if at that moment these social movements are all alone and there is no international solidarity, then it just disappears and it's forgotten. And of course, a couple of years it will come back. But you need a strong organization. You need solidarity between organizations. And you need to know that it is a long-term fight. I mean, these are the only elements that I really see. Because today, too, because neoliberalism has been interiorized, we're all in our heads. We're all living with neoliberalism, even if we don't want it and even if we refuse it. But the strength of individualism is so big at this moment. And we really have to focus and to emphasize that what we have to do is collectively organize and collectively try to achieve something. And that means organizing. Even if this means we have to work very hard on the democratic effect. I'm also working in the World Social Forum, so I know what we are talking about. We have this big fight there as well. But we have to organize and we have to get somewhere in the long term. I hope these two elements can be a part of the answer.
Yeah, thank you very much. How about Mina?
Yes, I'd like to just add a little bit. I think Francine has explained quite a bit in detail. I wanted to say that the fight is political. So unless we take it to the political, because when you integrate all the elements we're talking about, it adds up to a political battle. So when we say we are fighting for social protection, we are fighting for social transformation, we are talking about a total shift in power, and we are also fighting for a new kind of politics, and we are fighting for a welfare principle in any kind of state that would come in, that has to be based on a welfare principle. That is a political battle, because today that is no longer seen as the primary battle. It's left to some, oh, that's the work of political parties. That somehow will be done by somebody else out there, but that's not the way it's going to work. It has to be political. It has to be a huge political, united political battle. And that involves many levels. So I think when Francine mentioned the social forum, I think that many levels of coming together are needed. Levels of coming together on issues, coming together on broad political platforms are two different things. But both these are required as part of the political battle. Trade unions need to come together to fight for workers' rights. Okay, that's one level. Women are fighting for for liberation. They're fighting for equality, justice. These two battles are not separate. So when we say social protection is an interconnected set of things, the battle is also an interconnected set. And it has to be a political battle which involves the interests of so many hundreds of thousands of sets of people. Only then can we make change. And today the thing is, everybody talks about change, but nobody is putting it out there on the ground. To build that battle means battle on the ground, that people have to come together on the ground, sectors have to come together, and not just come together on the issue, it's also talking together, because we need to know where we differ and where we can come together. And frankly, today, the biggest deficit, I think, is democracy. And this is not just democracy at the top. Our problem is democracy even at our level, because the ability to be able to discuss and listen to each other, the ability for sectors to transcend their dislike, the traditional dislike of each other, to come together and say, okay, just because I listen to you, it doesn't mean that I agree with you. So I think that I think is a big battle. It's not part of our book. But when Rene asked this question, which is not something that we've dealt with in the book, of course, because it talks about social protection, but finally, what comes through in the book as well is that the battle is political.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hey, Rene, you have anything else you want to add or share with the audience?
Well, no more, but the answers of the two really floored me. Very inspiring. Yeah, venceremos.
Venceremos.
Okay, maybe then to finish before we go to the crowd, and I don't see too many questions in the Q&A, to be honest, none yet. We are not a very big group, but please don't hesitate. If you have anything to ask, remarks you want to make, just share them, and then we can discuss it together after this. But I have one final question for both authors. Would you think, apart from the COVID crisis that has highlighted, unfortunately, that a lot of the analysis, as you already mentioned, is correct, and has also highlighted lots of gaps and flaws in existing systems. Beyond this, we sometimes, from our side, in Inspire, we often say, yeah, there is a momentum worldwide, this growing attention for social protection. Is as such also a good thing? Would you agree with that, or is it not so simple to say? There's a lot of talk at the UN, at different UN organizations. The ILO will discuss it from next week on again. It's high on the agenda in this year's International Labour Conference. Would you say this is a positive thing, or isn't it that simple?
It is not that simple. Let me bring in a negative point. I mean, what the UN is doing, and especially what the ILO is doing, These are very positive things. Social protection is back on the international agenda. That is very, very positive. At the same time, as I used to say, never before has social protection been so threatened. Because if you analyze all the World Bank proposals and the UN proposals and the ILO proposals, well, let's take the ILO part. Let's look mainly at the World Bank. Since 1990, the philosophy of the World Bank has not changed. They are now talking about social protection, whereas in 1990 they were saying they were against social protection. But if you look at what the social protection means today for the World Bank, you see they are at a poverty reduction point. So they have not changed at all. And as Isabel Ortiz is now saying in her new study, we are confronted today with the new threat of a kind of Washington consensus once again, austerity once again, or ongoing. So that is one negative element. And the other negative element is that the whole discourse on social protection today is in the hands of the right and center right. They have prepared at the level of the World Bank, at the level of the European Union, they have prepared a whole new discourse on a new social contract, on social protection, on poverty reduction, etc., etc., etc. Their program is ready. Where is the program of the left? Where is the program of progressive for having a better social protection? I don't see it. And I admit the ILO is doing wonderful work. They're much more positive than the World Bank, absolutely. But they cannot go further. I mean, it is a tripartite organization. They go as far as they can. But there again, that is why we should go further. We should go beyond that. If you look at the recently came out the book of the director of the London School of Economics, which is not a socialist organization. She wrote a wonderful book about solidarity, about ethical values, about humanist values. Beautiful. What she does not mention is economic and social rights. And these rights exist. And we should fight for them. And we should fight for a comprehensive social protection system. And we should fight for transformation. So I have a problem at that level because I think progressive forces are not doing enough. They are working at the economic level, which is very good. They are looking at trade, which is very good. They are looking at the patents for the vaccines, which is very good, but not enough. So I think we have, as progressive forces, we have a duty to go beyond these international discourses and to fight for something that has not yet been given to us and that we need, absolutely, all of us. So, yes, SDGs are important. Yes, social protection flows are important, but not enough.
Okay, Mina, for your final comments, maybe on the same question. How do you see it for the future? Of course, you've already explained about organizing and getting together. Maybe the role of what can the APF mean in the future to facilitate or to help with this?
No, first I'd like to just comment on the ILO. I think as I agree totally with what Francine's already talked about it. And see, I see that this tripartite mechanisms and things that the ILO might do as one step. These are not the solutions. These are various kinds of methodologies which we can also use. Of course, we are all happy that the ILO is looking at extending what they were calling the social protection floor before. They're extending that. They're talking about more comprehensive social protection. That's good because it will help us. But of course, the tripartite is not going to make a revolution, and we shouldn't expect that either. But this is good. I think it's positive. We can use it in order to. So the other thing, and I know I'm seeing a question here which is kind of linked, I think. Is it okay if I read that out? Maybe
Go ahead.
See, because it says that the somebody has asked this question, the post-COVID will be very critical to resume our efforts in organizing work, given the hardship and struggle that people and governments have gone through during the pandemic. And what would be your view on this? I think somehow this connects with that. Because people who are working on the ground with people, they know that it's not only about having the framework, because you see what we are talking about, social protection is a framework of thinking and a framework of doing, because that has to help you to organize. The thing is, when after this is over, there's going to be a lot of work that has to be done on the ground, in which the tripartite mechanisms, the AEPFs and the various kinds of the World Social Forum, all these are extremely important for us to get there. When we are working, what are the experiences of other countries? What are other governments doing? What are other movements thinking? How are they dealing with this? Because finally, you have to work if we are a trade union, we know, all of us who work with workers know that we have to provide relief. We have to provide, we fight for higher wages. But this is not going to transform the entire system. But this is part of the battle, because if we don't do this, we can't do the other thing. So we cannot be only in the realm of, the idea. So all the things that you were asking, all these various fora, all these various institutions, all this I think is part of that battle as well. So we are working at various battles from ground up to the ideating, right? And the two are linked. So I don't think that we can talk about any one institution or two providing the leadership in terms of thinking or conceptualizing social protection or any other idea. So I think of it again as a composite of many, many things that have to be taken together in order to organize, in order to fight, in order to conceptualize, and to win. Because we don't talk about winning. We have to win at every level. Only then we'll win the final battle.
Winning at every level. Indeed. Quite a challenge. I see no more questions for now. I would again invite the audience, if you have any comments or any questions, please ask them. We have already, well, let's say, past the time we provided for my questions and for the questions of Rene. So please don't hesitate. Jump in.
No questions, I think.
Well, maybe one then. I'll come back to Mina, and maybe Francine can also help. You both have a lot of experience, and it's also a little bit what we try to do, but also with limited means. And Mina, you touched on the thing that different organizations, different sectors, different components of civil society at large, of social movements, a natural dislike, you said. And indeed,
not natural, a traditional dislike.
Something like that. And this is often the case. But how could you, like, just to continue the hopefulness, yeah? What would be your take or your insights or ideas on how to overcome this? Because from my experience, it also takes time. It needs people simply to get to know each other. To give one example, when we launched the National Campaign on Social Protection in Belgium, the campaign was meant to be held in 2015, 2016, and the first meetings were held in 2013. And with the first like discussions and meetings we had about it, I noticed that organizations of which I thought they were very, very similar and I'm talking about NGOs linked to the labor movement with strong links to trade unions. They didn't even know each other. They thought they knew what the others were doing, but they didn't know what the others were doing. So it took 2 full years to get to a common platform, to a common set of demands. Is this realistic, given the urgency of the matter in many countries, particularly in Asia? Do we have that time? And how can we do it?
Well, as I said, these are really, I think it's great that you persevered and try to build that. But I think it's also about building common areas. There's solidarity, okay, supporting each other's struggles. That's very important. There's discourse, talking to each other, finding out what other people are doing. That's important. But finally, it's also important, I think, to build common areas. It may not be my issue, your issue. This could be a common issue. So when we say common, a commons, there also has to be some kind of political commons around which people can come together and say, okay, this is what we really have to do. So I think that doesn't happen unless these two things happen: solidarity and discussion. I can't think of any other way that. But I think during times of crisis, people do come together because they know that when there's repression, for instance, on people, when there are arrests and people are getting arrested, people do know that's the most important thing because everybody is under attack. It's no point waiting for everybody to go before that. But we don't have to wait for that. Because at that time, this solidarity and coming together becomes it's very, very difficult. So I think we must pay attention to solidarity and to building common areas and to fight on those. Maybe that's what we need to do. And finally, it's also true that Francine was talking about the fact that trade unions are organizing on the ground. All organizations need to understand that unless we are organizing on the ground, we are not going to be very effective. It's all going to be a lot of ideas with no takers, because they need to be seized by movements. Yeah. That Francine was talking about the fact that trade unions are organizing on the ground. All organizations need to understand that unless we are organizing on the ground. I'm hearing me.
Yes, we are hearing you again. I don't know what's going on technically. But maybe briefly, Francine, could you add? And then I see the chat a question also, and also in the Q&A. So maybe briefly, Francine, do you want to add on this, or we go to the questions?
Sorry, I'll answer very briefly, and then I think we should go to the questions.
Yeah.
I think there are two elements that are very important in this point, and that is one, diversity, and two, trust. I mean, we do not have to agree on every point. We do need a universal framework, and within that universal framework, there is room, and there should be a lot of room for many, many different solutions, as long as we can agree on the universal framework. And that is why we made that charter. I mean, I think that is very important as a guideline. And within that, everyone looks for his or her own solutions. And that is only possible, that kind of work, if we trust each other. I mean, if we do not trust each other, if trade unions say, oh, this is a social movement, that they are too far, too leftist, etc., it will not work. I mean, trust is a basic element. And if we do that, I think we can indeed achieve something.
Okay, thank you. Now we have two questions. I'll start with the one in the Q&A, and then I go to the one in the chat. A question from Sundara Babu. COVID has battered all the social protection warriors. How do you both foresee the social protection in the coming years in the context of gig economy? Anything specific on the gig economy? Who wants to start?
That is a new fight that is coming. It is a new fight that is coming, and that will force us to be innovative, indeed. I mean, it will not have exactly the same elements and the same mechanisms as we have in the welfare states that we have in Western Europe, for instance. But at the same time, again, the basic principle should be the same. And that means people need a contract. People need a labor contract in which their rights and their duties are defined. That is very important. They should have their economic and social rights. And maybe there can be lots of very, very flexible solutions. Um, at this moment, what we see is that young people ask for flexibility. They want flexibility. So that is okay as long as they have a contract, as long as their rights are guaranteed, and as long as their living wages are guaranteed. And that is why we worked also on this income security, because that is such a very important point. So this new economy that is coming to us will not destroy all the jobs. I do not believe, it's not the question of belief, of course, but I mean, there are enough economists that are telling us that indeed, yes, there will be a big change in labor markets, but jobs will not disappear. They may be organized in a different way. And that is where we have to look for the basic principles that we want to be respected and guaranteed.
Okay, then a question in the chat for Mina. How do you see the steps taken by the government of Kerala to strengthen some of the basic areas like education, health, etc., and the welfare measures adopted during COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, that in fact, what is happening in Kerala just shows that political will is what is required in order to make change. That's one state. It's really difficult for one state to make change, but despite that, Kerala has done much more than anywhere else to put measures in place in order to make sure that people don't die, for a start, to survive. And besides all the other welfare, I know about one thing that I can definitely talk about. It's the one state in which they're talking very, they're set up rental for migrant workers, rentals. It's not as if all migrant workers in Kerala are housed there, but it's something that's replicable. We are looking at that in order to look for that, to replicate that in other states as well, because they need rental housing. All housing cannot be only ownership based. It cannot be, only based in because Kerala doesn't have, the kind of slums that we see in other cities. The other states, you don't see that there. So yes, in fact, I say that Kerala has shown political will to do a lot. It's really difficult because they don't have money. Ours is not really a federal system when you look at finance. Finance is not really federated in the way that it should. So states have very little money and not able to levy much taxation in order to get money, in order to do welfare schemes. But they have, yes. So yes, it's very good what they've done. I think there's a lot to learn from Kerala. And we, at least in the field of labor, we are going to try and replicate that elsewhere. I'd just like to add to the gig economy. And I just wanted to say, for instance, the Uber, Ola and Swiggy, there is an Indian Federation of app-based transport workers who are part of the WPC as well, and they are a union which has been fighting. And they are looking, in fact, their demands are to do with social protection. That's what they're fighting for. They are saying that they should be vaccinate everybody free of cost. They're saying make sure that the loans that they have taken, that there should be no penalty on their loans. See, all these are just the demands are in fact not about the traditional demands about wages and bonus and other things. They are in fact directly talking about social protection. That's what the gig workers are talking about. So yes, so that's going to be the battle of the future with more workers going into the gig economy.
Okay, thank you very much. I think for now we don't have any more questions. Maybe like a few final remarks from both authors. Maybe Rene, one final remark from you before we give the floor then for final remarks. Aha, I see coming. From Wilson Okoy. Social justice must begin at the grassroots level, reflecting a common ideology and plans, short and mid-term at least. Stakeholders from the public and private sector must be involved for an effective system because many, at times, the laws are there to provide justice, but meeting the justice of a post-COVID requires futuristic thinking and efficient, effective implementation. So a plea for a bottom-up approach. Does this bind or go together with the call you make in the book for a government-led social protection? So maybe both you can answer this question for the bottom-up approach.
Well, I think that is where our concept of social commons comes in. I mean, it is obvious that if we talk about social protection, talk about social rights, there is on the one hand governments that have to guarantee these rights, but this will never happen if at the grassroots level there is no demand for it, and if there is no fight for it. I mean, we're not getting gifts. Social rights have never been achieved. You know, they have never been falling out from the sky. So not only do grassroots levels have to fight for their rights, they also have to be involved in how these rights are implemented and how these rights are effectively put into practice. So it is necessarily always a fight that comes from effectively from the basis, from people on the ground, but for which you also need public authorities at the local level, at the national level, at the global level to guarantee these rights. I mean, that is one of the basic elements in our concept of social commons. It cannot be a government-led system that is imposed on people. That will never work. It will never work because it will never exactly meet the concrete needs of people. These needs are similar, or you can say they are the same for all people all over the world, but the way in which they have to be met will be different in all places all over the world. So these concrete demands will have to come from people, and people will have to see whether they are met in a correct way, implemented in a correct way, guaranteed in a correct way. So it is necessarily a project of cooperation, and where the grassroots will have the main voice necessarily, I think.
So Nina, your take on that question before we take the last question?
No, I think that Francine's really dealt with that question. I can't think of anything that I might want to add, except to say that when we talk about social protection, when we say that, we do say that governments have to be the governments have to be responsible. It doesn't mean that they have to to provide these everywhere, but they have to be responsible for the provision of these entitlements. I mean, that's what they voted in to do. That's what their job should be. But they do everything else, right? Most of the time. So, but there's one more question that's come up. So maybe you want to look at that.
Yeah, the last one. While fighting for social protection, what kind of pitfalls we need to be aware of or be careful with, which can undermine the fight? And this comes from Chinmay Naik.
Two pitfalls. That's the one we just discussed, thinking that everything can be done at the grassroots level, or everything can be done at government level. That would be a big mistake. And within that context, still with that first point, thinking that it is about class compromise. It is not about class compromise. It is about changing the power relations. Because at this moment, grassroots levels have no power. And we are the 99%, but we do not have the power of 99%. So it is not about class compromise. It is about changing the power relations. And that mistake should never happen. That is the first pitfall. The second pitfall is what I also already mentioned, is reading The Economist. If you read The Economist of the past months, you will see different articles on welfare states, on basic income, on new types of new social contract. And these discourses are so beautiful. I mean, if you read it and you do not know what is behind it, then you think, wow, these people are all in favor of social protection and social and economic rights. And they are not. I mean, so take care if you read World Bank documents, if you read The Economist, and you think everything is fine. It is not. What these people are thinking of is a kind of better poverty reduction, but they do not take care of middle classes. They do not take care of economic and social rights and of a real contract for the whole of society. I mean, the whole difference between the social protection we are thinking of, and let us say, for instance, the basic income, universal basic income people, is precisely that we are thinking in collective terms. We are thinking of society. We are not thinking of individuals alone. We are thinking of a societal project. We are not thinking of the economic and social rights of you and me. We are thinking of us. And that means your rights and our rights, because we're interdependent. And that is what we should never forget when we read and when we think about social protection.
Okay. Mina, maybe your take on that one? Maybe a third pitfall?
Yeah, I think Francine has explained that very well. I just want to also add that there is this this feeling that that this can be done by private companies, that all this can be done through business, that social protection can be a good business, and that this can, okay, maybe it's good business. It is actually good business. The insurance companies amongst the richest in the world. American insurance and medical insurance companies are powerful enough to change policy. Therefore, I mean, it's not to say that, I mean, this is something that we have to discuss further. In poorer countries, maybe a system of the 4 Ps, you know, private, public, people, partnerships are not something that we should just throw out of the window, because sometimes those, but the important thing is people in that. That's one. And the second is that the public, which means that the government should make sure that it is regulated. Otherwise, it can easily turn into another, you know, into either a profit-making venture, which essentially benefits a company, or something that's just built to fail. So, which then, you know, then kind of ruins people's faith in doing anything, in setting up anything that can help. But I think that that people being the central to these things, it can mean that we can do these kind of people, public and private partnerships. I think those are things that we could, I think that there's no prejudice against it. But the most important thing is that there should be regulation. The state has to be on top of making sure that it is regulated. And private companies cannot be trusted to provide social protection to people. Business, it's not business. Yeah.
Indeed, it should be like at least based on solidarity. So this all being said, I find it a very, very oh, Sami, hey guys, but we will close in 10 minutes at the latest. The challenges before us, according to Brother Sami from India, the need to make the state to ensure and guarantee social protection to all and at the same time? And what are the alternatives the people's movements can propose and initiate? Part of that
Read our book. Read our book. Read our book.
Okay, well, maybe we come to that. I have not congratulated you with the massive work you did to finish and to draft this book. So we can only indeed invite everyone to read it. It's very interesting and a very comprehensive overview of where to go for social protection in the future. But then maybe the practical question, where and when will the book be available for people to
Yes, it is.
buy it or to read it? It may be interesting to share that information.
Yeah, I put it once again here. Here.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's just you click on there and you can read the book.
No,
Oh.
you can buy it.
Ah. Okay.
Can I add one thing just before?
Go ahead.
Because there's one quote that I like to mention to make very clear what we are confronted with. There is this famous book of Klaus Offer of somewhere in the 80s. Klaus Offer said, capitalism does not want social protection. We should be clear about that. But at the same time, capitalism knows that it cannot survive without social protection.
Yeah.
And if we understand that, then we understand what the World Bank is doing today and what The Economist is doing today. That is trying to save that part of social protection that capitalism needs to survive. Nothing else and nothing more. I think that is very important, a very important knowledge to work with when you're fighting for social and economic rights.
Okay. So maybe one final thing on alternatives people movements can propose, maybe some elements you haven't mentioned yet for as a final remark from both of you.
That was my final remark.
Okay, then I go to Nina.
Yeah, I just hope that that the link between the ideas that we are talking about and the movements is clear. And I hope that we are able to make this connection, because that's when it really becomes useful. That one. Secondly, I think refining these ideas is also very important. How exactly we do this in different countries. The possibility of having comprehensive social protection in different countries, in different contexts, is also the extension of this logic to that is also very important. So I think that would be very useful to be able to take this logic forward. So I hope that will be a contribution from others who have been part of this conversation or those who will read the book. Yeah.
Okay. So allow me then to conclude, to thank you both very much. I see Rene has unfortunately had to leave us. But let's thank him, of course, as well for his take, for his critical reading of the book and his contribution, and also all of the participants for their interesting questions. I found it at least a very interesting exchange on social protection, on a broad concept of social protection as a social commons that can help us and give us a framework for future action, future campaign, and for building that trust and mutual knowledge of what we all do to move on together and win at all stages. Thank you very much, and see you in future APF activities.